we want to continue the conversation around moving into the future, right? And so what Dr. Kaku shared was a very visionary look at where things are going. But a lot of you are probably thinking, as I was sitting over there, I was thinking, okay, how do we get there, right? What are the first steps? What are the next steps to moving into the future? And I thought it was really interesting watching Dr. Kaku's presentation, because it reminded me of the last time I was at Appian World a couple of years ago. On the screen, we had a picture of a brain and showing how you need to start using design thinking and systems thinking, connecting both sides of the brain to actually redesign business processes, right? And so what I want to do today is continue that conversation, moving towards the future that Dr. Kaku laid out, but also looking at what does this mean in the process and apps world that we work in every day. And at Forrester, a lot of what we focus on, a lot of what I focus on, is challenging conventional wisdom, right? How we think about BPM, how we think about process, and then defining how do you lead that change. And so a big part of what we've been focused on at Forrester is helping companies develop customer-obsessed strategies to win in the age of the customer. And so when we talk about the future, right now we're in this age. We've entered into an age about in 2010, as Forrester defines it, we entered into the age of the customer. And that's about creating strategies to win, serve, and retain customers. Right? That's the competitive advantage in the age of the customer. And so what we want to talk about today is the first steps to winning in that age. And when we talk about age of the customer, it's really a 30-year, 20, 30-year cycle. Where we came from was the age of information. But now, a lot of the conversation you're hearing is around reinventing. How do we redesign our processes for age of the customer? Actually, it's interesting, when Michael said my Twitter name, Passion for Process, I'm actually going to change my Twitter handle. You heard it first here today. Because one thing I realize now is I'm not really a process person, right? Nathaniel's looking at me like, wow, this is a really good admission, right? What I've realized is actually I'm a customer person. I realize now, I know some of you do this if you've been in BPM or process for a while, no matter where you go, you look at a process or you look at things as a process, right? I think we were in the lunch line yesterday and some people were analyzing the process of the lunch line. Like, how do we improve this? How do we make it go faster? You're coming from the wrong side, man, go over there, right? And I was just thinking, you know, I don't look at processes in the same way like that anymore. What I find is I begin to look at what is the experience that this process is delivering? What is the outcome? How is this company not driving the experience, and how can they improve the process for the experience as opposed to just improving the process for the sake of going through the salad line faster, right? And so I now see all of these experiences. No matter where I go, I run into these crazy experiences where I say, wow, they could actually have a better outcome, better customer experience if they focused on this. In a way, that is what customer obsession is about. Looking at every aspect of the customer experience and being fanatical about improving them. And so I want to share with you a story. I told you I'm now into this. My name is no longer Passion for Process. My name is Passion for Customers, right? And just to share with you an example of this, the importance of customer experience, customer obsession. A couple weeks back, probably a month ago now, I received an amazing offer in the mail from Jaguar, right? How many of you are familiar with Jaguar? Yeah? How many people have Jaguar before I tell the story? Okay. Before I trash your car. So I received this amazing offer. I should have brought the packaging. It looked like it was, they put $100 into this packaging. And it was an offer from Jaguar and Thomas Pink. How many of you are familiar with Thomas Pink? The clother. It's a men's clothing store, kind of high-end clothing. And so the offer said, come test drive a Jaguar, and you'll get a $250 gift certificate to Thomas Pink. I was like, that's not bad. That might buy me a sleeve of a Thomas Pink shirt, right? They're a pretty expensive store. But I said, you know what? I'm actually going to go call them up. Great concierge service, actually called in. They were like, hey, you know, what's your number, blah, blah, blah. Great experience. Set up my appointment for the following Saturday. Was like, this is going to be great. I'm not a fan of Jaguar. My dad had a Jaguar when I was a kid. Jaguar always broke down, so wasn't a fan of Jaguar. But I said, you know what? Let's go and check it out. Maybe one day if I work for Appian, I'll be able to afford a Jaguar, right? So I said, let me go and check it out. So the Saturday comes, me and my fiance, we get all dressed up, like, wow, we're gonna go test drive this car, you know, let's make sure we look kind of good. And so we go, it's right in Bethesda, I live here in DC, we go to Bethesda, go to the Jaguar store. We have to wait 30 minutes before someone actually acknowledges us and says, can we help you? That was the first thing. We were just like, this is really weird. We had an appointment. They knew we were coming, I assume, right? So the manager comes out and says, you know, what do you guys need? How can we help you? You know, we tell them, hey, we're here for a 1 o'clock appointment to test drive Jaguar with this promotion that you have going on. The manager says, I'm sorry, we just don't have time today, and we didn't actually have the appointment of you coming. Can you come back later, another time? I was like, really? You serious? And he was like, yeah, you know, we get these promotions all the time. People come in, you know, we want you to take a look at the car, but at the end of the day, you know, we can just get a photocopy of your ID, and, you know, we can get you the $250 gift certificate. You don't even have to drive the car. I was like, wow. Just kind of blown away, right? And so all the time, my fiance is kind of sitting next to us, listening to this conversation, and she goes on to the Jaguar dealership's Facebook page and posts, #fail, worst experience ever, will never come back, right? And we were just blown away, like, what happened here, right? Something happened, something went wrong. Not only did I leave thinking, I never want to buy a Jaguar, I also left thinking, I don't even want the $250 gift certificate from Thomas Pink, because every time I wear the shirt, guess what? I'm going to be thinking about the crappy experience I had, right? And so this is the type of stuff I really take a close look at now, because at the end of the day, this is, even though it's customer experience, customer obsession, it is about process, right? And this is what we as process people or apps people have to start looking at. It's not just about customer experience, it's about customer obsession. How do we actually engage and improve that experience and make fanatical customers? And so we know customer obsession is directly linked with revenue. This is not just a nice feel-good thing anymore, and it's not just about customer satisfaction or improving your net promoter score, right? It's actually, leaders see now that improving customer experience, or they say this is the #1 priority, right? 76% of leaders say improving the customer experience is a top priority. Right behind that is growing revenue, 73%. And these two things are linked. When we talk to customers, our customers, and talk to companies about customer experience, they're not just doing it because it makes them feel good. They're doing it because they realize this is how you grow revenue, and this is how you create sticky customers. But it's not just the leaders in companies that actually see the value in this, right? If we take a look, Forrester, we did a study with Watermark Consulting to look at what is the tangible financial performance of improving customer experience. And we compared the leaders and laggards. So look at companies that had the best customer experience versus companies that had the worst. And we do, every year, we do what's called a customer experience index. And we look at all of the top 500 or so companies and rank them based on their performance around customer experience. So we look at specific metrics in terms of, are they delighting customers? How are they handling engaging customers? How are they doing on digital engagement? So we look at all of these metrics, and we rank companies from leaders to laggards. And so we took that data in 2014, 2013, and compared the performance, financial performance, stock performance of the leaders versus the S&P versus the laggards. Right? And so here's what we found. For customer experience leaders, companies that really focus on customer experience, relentlessly focus on customer obsession, 77.7% financial improvement over time, or growth in financial indicators, stock indicators. For the S&P 500 over the same time, 51.5% growth. And then when we look at the laggards, negative 2.5% growth, which isn't bad. But if you look at the delta on that, the leaders between the laggards, it's about an 80% delta in terms of the performance, financial performance. So shareholders also look at this and say, it's really good for our top line, really good for our bottom line, really good for the business and being competitive. But what exactly is customer obsession? You heard me kind of talk about this. We throw terms out. What is customer obsession? How many of you live in DC? How many of you have gone to a Caps game lately? Right? This is what customer obsession looks like, right? I went to a Caps game just recently. Caps are in the playoffs. And Caps have some crazy fans, right? Just people, I don't go to Caps game as much as I would like, but whenever I go, I'm like, these people are just psycho. They're just crazy. I mean, if you look at some of the chants, I'm like, wow, this feels like Braveheart, right? If you look at the guys, like Braveheart. And ultimately, when we talk about customer obsession, we're saying becoming fanatical about delivering customer value, but also focusing on the best strategies, relentlessly focus on best strategies to win, serve, and retain customers. And that's really what customer obsession comes down to. But getting to customer obsession and becoming a customer-obsessed company is a journey. And it goes through several steps. And we're seeing companies that are focused on this, becoming customer-obsessed company, going through several steps in the journey. And so the first step is we see companies go through is they focus on customer experience. We got to improve the customer experience. That's what we got to focus on. So that's that first stage, is an acknowledgement of improving the customer experience. The second stage is around digital business. So most companies, once they realize we have to improve customer experience, they move into accelerating, delivering on the digital business. And then we see companies move into embracing the mobile mind shift, actually changing how they engage with customers over mobile, different channels, and then turning big data into business insights. So actually starting to mine the data so you can connect with the experience. But what we see a lot of times in that cycle, where it stalls, in a lot of cases, is companies just focus on that surface digital customer experience. How can we digitize the end-to-end customer process so we can have engagement over mobile, that sort of thing? Digitize products and services as part of the ecosystem. That's another big piece that customers take on, companies take on. And creating trusted machines so we can make sure that we're giving advice that will be trusted, that can be trusted from our different systems and analysis. But if we go back to that example of Jaguar, right? Jaguar did a really great job of marketing and actually getting me into the store. They focused on this customer experience part. Even from a digital standpoint, they did a really good job. What didn't they do a good job on? What do you think? What's that? I do ask questions, so. The human experience. I argue that a lot of companies, when they focus on digital and customer experience, they don't go into the operational side. And that's the piece that's missing. It's almost, if you think about shooting an arrow, it's just the tip of the spear we see companies focused on, just that first piece. What we believe companies have to focus on is also digital operational excellence. This is a key piece that's missing from the customer experience conversation, right? Because in a way, we were over-rotated on what is customer experience. Everybody has to do it. But we see so many companies starting, but they stall because they haven't focused on digitizing their operations, actually focusing on how do I connect in with the ecosystem, my partners, even my customers. How do I enable them to connect in with our operations to build their own products? This second one is really important and is important to where we are with BPM, driving rapid customer-centric innovation. How do I speed up, get things out much faster? And then digitizing for agility over efficiency. So it's not just about becoming efficient, and you heard some of this yesterday. It's really about responsiveness, digitizing for agility. And so the key here is this is a great opportunity for the BPM market, right? If you look at the bottom part, this is stuff that BPM does all day, right? But the challenge is BPM has to change. And so how many of you saw the movie The Mask, right? I kind of, Matt's not here, but he was talking about max headroom. But when I think about, yesterday he was talking about max headroom, when I think about where BPM has come from and how it needs to change, historically this is what BPM looked like, right? Big, gaudy, I love the money because that's BPM, a lot of money, right? A lot of resources. And in order to meet the digital operational excellence and digital customer experience challenge, BPM has to take off its mask. It has to become what its original value proposition was. Get stuff done quickly, be able to change quickly, and also be able to touch and improve the experience for customers. And so we have to take off this mask to move into this new era, as you heard some of what Appian was sharing yesterday. So how do we do this? There are 3 steps that we need to focus on as process people, as process and apps people, to move our BPM programs closer to customer obsession, being able to connect the digital experience and digital operations. And so the first step, this is key. I think if nothing else you get out of this whole event, the most important thing you can begin to do is align customer and operational metrics. This is a step that companies we work with often skip, but is really critical. And so it's starting to look at, instead of just efficiency, operational metrics, we begin to align things like convenience, metrics around time to complete. How many channels did a customer engage to get a problem solved? If a customer engaged more than, let's say, 4 channels, is that good? How many people say that's good? Okay, I saw one hand go up. Number of attempts. We also need to start measuring engagement. Abandoned carts. This is one of the key metrics that one of our customers use. And it's not just for retail. It's actually saying how many processes were initiated by customers and never complete. How many service requests were initiated but the customer abandoned because they found another way to get it resolved. System workarounds is another big metric. Shadow processes. Advocacy is also good. Net promoter scores, visitor frequency, social sentiment. But the key here is when we talk to customers about these, a lot of the feedback we get is it's hard to quantify these things in a way that helps build a business case or looks at ROI. And so one of the things that I started doing is we just published a report, research, on specific quantifiable customer metrics, customer-facing and revenue metrics. And so I ended up talking to about 15 different companies to look at what are those new metrics that they're focused on and what are the new benefits. So I wanted to share some of these here. So new BPM benefits, accelerate customer acquisition, so being able to speed up the time that we actually get a customer onboarded. And that metric, and the key here is translating those benefits into quantifiable metrics. And so time to open a new account. One of the customers we spoke with was a underwriter. And a big part of what they were trying to do is speed up the time to open a new account so they could get revenue in. And so they were able to cut the time for opening a new account in half, which led to revenue acceleration. This next one was really good. Protect existing revenue streams. The amount of revenue saved recovered is what teams are starting to look at, right? So it's looking at, can we save revenue that we might have otherwise lost? Can we recover revenue? And a good example, one of the clients that we talked to was a municipality out in the Midwest. And one of the things they were sharing is they actually lost a hotel building opportunity, a hotel coming to the city because they didn't have visibility into the licensing process or the permitting process. And so when the city council kept meeting to look at this request, they never had all the information they needed. And the hotel chain finally got fed up and said, you know what, we're actually not going to do this project. We're going to take it to another town. That's millions of dollars lost in economic impact, millions of dollars lost in potential revenue for the city. And so that's another example. Another one, increase upsell, cross-sell. This is pretty standard. With this one, it's about driving an incremental increase in revenue per agent. So how can we get more revenue from each interaction, right? And then some of the other ones, this first-time resolution is really about how do we resolve that customer problem on the first time, and that leads both to cost savings but also to increased revenue opportunities. And so I want to share an example. This is a bank that we interviewed for this research, and they focused on being able to drive down the amount of time it takes to resolve a problem on the first time. And they wanted to be able to resolve more problems that came into the bank, in the branch, on the first time. And so what they ended up using BPM combined with analytics so they could recommend or guide the rep when they're working with the customer real time to solve that problem. And also collect, so using social also, collect data on other problems that came up and resolutions for those problems. And so what they were able to do is improve first-time resolution by 30%. So first time a customer comes into a branch, reports a problem, they were able to solve that, increase the amount of times they were able to solve that by 30%. The other thing they were able to do that was pretty impressive is decrease wait times in the branch from 45 minutes to 5 minutes. That's a crazy metric, 45 minutes. Think about it, you go into a branch, number one, you probably don't want to even go into the branch, right? That's a bad experience in itself. You go in the branch and you have to wait 45 minutes, right? Able to reduce that down to 5 minutes, right? So able to serve more customers, improve, in this case, they were able to improve their net promoter score by 15 points, which is really impressive, or 15%. And so the second thing that we have to do, where BPM has to change, is to focus on digital speed. How's digital speed different from, let's say, analog speed? How do you think digital speed is different? You raise your hand, or you just raise your coffee cup, or you have to answer now. How do you think digital speed is different from analog speed? What do you think is different? And I like asking this question because when we talk about speed, sometimes people say, well, we've always had to move fast, right? But what's so different today about the speed that we need to move at? Why is it a different type of speed? What do you think?
Expectations are different.
Expectations are different? I'll even argue that moving slower today has a more detrimental outcome than it did in the past. So if I take 3 months to get a new product out, and I have a new competitor or a startup that's getting a new product out and can move even faster, I could actually die, right? Whereas before, you could see it as a slow-moving crash about to happen. Now it's just you don't even see it, right? And that's what we mean by digital clock speed. BPM has to shift to focus on faster capability, delivering at much faster rate. And so we know we're in this era, right? Age of the customer. We heard this throughout all of the speeches. I heard a lot of customers talking about this. Projects taking too long, processes being inflexible, change is too expensive and too slow. Talents are out of date. That's a big one. We did a survey that looked at whether CIOs feel they have the skills needed to do digital transformation. Only 15% felt they had the skills needed to actually drive digital, right? And so we know talents are out of date for driving this. What we've been talking about at Forrester that is driving this speed is an area we call low-code platforms. And when we say low-code platforms, it's not just about hand coding, it's about speeding up delivery, right? And so when we look at this, it's really, when we look at process, it's about speeding up delivery, obviously, going from years, months to weeks, release cycles going from annual to weekly, but even more importantly, the methods we use, right? How many of you use some form of Agile, right? Okay. Today, we consider that to be something, most companies using something along the lines of water, scrum, fall, right? Agile mixed with waterfall. What we're seeing when we talk about low-code methods, though, it's more about test and learn. Because when you're dealing with the customer, when you're trying to figure out what needs to change, a lot of times the customer doesn't know, and you don't know either. You're shooting at a moving target, right? And so what we're seeing teams adopt is a test and learn approach, where they're actually building the functionality. I think Sprint did a good job in a session yesterday talking about, essentially we kind of duct tape things together just to get an idea out, and then we got the idea out, and once we were able to prove it out, we moved into the next stage, and we built it out even further. But it's that cycle of test and learn. And a lot of times, some of the companies that we talked to, one company in particular was a insurer that was using test and learn to test out an idea for a new revenue stream. And so they were trying to test out, can we drive new revenue using or drive new revenue around bereavement insurance. Sorry to get morbid, but some of you may know what that is. But they wanted to see, can we drive new revenue? And so they used a low-code platform to build, to configure this solution very quickly. There's process behind it. Put it out, tested it. They were able to validate that this could be a new revenue stream. And so these test and learn techniques, this is an area that I'm very fascinated by, is how do you apply lean startup, test and learn, validated learning to move faster? And that's actually a book I recommend. If you haven't read it yet, definitely take a look at The Lean Startup. Really great ideas about how to use those sort of techniques, test and learn, customer validation in an enterprise environment. So the last piece that's important is where we traditionally were with BPM. Whenever we build a process, we also have this training period, right? We've got to go out and train all the users on what the process is, right? What we're saying with low-code approaches, it shouldn't even be any training. You should be designing the solution, the process, to be easy enough that as soon as you roll it out, people get it, right? Think about the example from Ryder. Right? If we look at the Ryder example, they couldn't really train, if you remember Matt talking about this, they couldn't train all of their people on this process. They put it on mobile, on iPads, and made it easy enough that a new employee could figure it out very quickly. That's intuitive now. We're designing to make it easy without training. And so when we look at low code and where BPM is going, my belief and my prediction, I guess I can put on my Dr. Kaku jacket here, get professorial. So my prediction is that BPM will morph and become focused on this low code opportunity, right? To the point where 5 years from now, we may not be talking about BPM, the label, but talking about a low code value acceleration platform. That's a lot of words, but let's say low-code platforms, right? And low-code approaches. And we're starting to get customers asking these questions about how do I adopt a low-code approach, get things out faster? And the steps that low-code, the ways that low-code speed delivery are providing visual descriptions. And I love this slide because I think this is how we begin to hold Matt to the cut the development time in half. How many of you got that in writing just yesterday? But we are seeing these platforms reduce the time to deliver dramatically. And so when we talk to customers, it's 30, 40%. I have yet to see a customer say half, but I want to hear your stories as you're working with the product. But it's the visual descriptions that are much faster than coding, right? I can visually drag and drop. This is what BPM process tools have done well. Discover true requirements and real value. So it's really going back to this test and learn. How can I work with the customer immediately, get some feedback, live trial business ideas at low or no cost, right? So I can get started quick, test out ideas, deploy and scale apps in minutes. So part of the challenge here is we can build apps quickly, but what if that app is a success? What happens then, right? We can prototype. And also we see a lot of customers buying or using these platforms to generate mobile apps from older apps, right? And this is a good story. I mean, as we talk to clients about this, people are like, hell yeah, I need this. Where do I go get it, right? The fast delivery, though, is definitely there. Minimum viable projects, experiments, long tail and disposable apps. The bigger challenge that companies have to deal with, that you guys have to deal with, is sustainable delivery. So it's not enough just to, like I said before, to deliver quickly. It's how do I take that same thing and scale it out? What if it's a hit, hyper adoption? I need to go from testing it out with 5 people, 5 customers, to now I need to go to 100,000 customers. How do you deal with that? Application lifecycle management. So how do I bring things and manage that application lifecycle to get it out there quickly, but also reusing components? The other piece is design best practices. It's very fascinating calls around this topic lately. We talked to a company that had purchased a low-code platform, not Appian, and it actually built 16,000 apps. Think about that. One company, they had this platform, they just turned it loose, they built 16,000 apps. Only 7,000 of the apps are actually active. That's a nightmare from a governance standpoint. They're now going through trying to go back, figure out who's using what, is it really being used? And so from the onset, as you're adopting these platforms, you have to think about the governance, you have to think about guidelines. I actually spoke to an Appian customer yesterday that I thought did a really good job of having guidelines around when to use this platform versus when to use something else, right? Because a lot of times, and this is the old cliche or the old wives' tale, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. In this case, you want to be very careful that you're using the platform that makes sense and that it can scale. So I strongly recommend, as you're working with Appian and having other tools in-house, take time to build a decision tree to actually help you guide the conversation around when do I use this versus when I use something else, right? And so we gave the example of Ryder, and one of the things I love about the Ryder story is they represent the classic example of where low-code makes sense, right? And when you look at the CIO, his biggest challenge was he needed to update these old legacy systems, old legacy applications to make it more mobile. The biggest challenge was, do we go out and buy something, like a packaged solution? Do we actually hand code it? Or do we buy something that's a platform where we can build very rapidly, right? And so what you saw with the Ryder example was the ability to deliver much faster, so significantly faster, without having to get in hand coding, and mobile enabling their applications, right? And so I think wonderful example, very good example of how low code gets used. So I'm going to leave you with this secret weapon. And as I've been looking at customer obsession, as I've been looking at customer experience, I found that there's one secret ingredient that companies that excel at this do that others don't. They focus on empathy. How many of you know what empathy is? How many of you are empathetic? Everybody raise their hand, right? We're all empathetic, right? But the key here is how do we embed empathy in our processes? How do we make our processes more empathetic? And when I started doing this research, going back a while, around design thinking and how design thinking impacts BPM, which is part of that customer obsession, customer experience. You know, I talked to these design firms and they were sharing with me, you know, what design thinking is, you know, firms like IDEO, all this. And one of the things that came up that I just could not wrap my mind around initially was empathy. Like, what does that mean? Like, we build systems. Why do systems have to be empathetic, right? How do you make them empathetic? And I finally got it when one of the design firms said, you know, have you ever seen Undercover Boss, right? And I was like, yeah. He said, that's empathy. When that boss, when that executive goes from his feet up in his executive boardroom talking about how great his company is, to actually getting out on the front line and learning. Customers hate us. I always see the restaurant versions or the fast food versions of Undercover Boss for some reason. But it's like the CEO of the restaurant chain goes out into the business and he learns that customers hate his food. And then employees also are not happy with the company because they can't, in this one episode, they had to not go to school or skip school, getting their education, college education, to work to feed their family, right? And so when I got that, I said, okay, I get it now. It's really about having an understanding of what the customer's pain points are. What are they trying to do? And then designing around that, right? And we as process people, I'm guilty of this, but I'm a recovering process person, right? So, but if I go back to my days, before I joined Forrester, I was out in the field. I ran a consulting practice, large consulting practice around BPM, worked for different BPM vendors. And whenever we go into a project, after building the solution and the customer wanted new requirements, I was definitely not a customer person. And I was like, no, this is our baby. We built this. Why do you want to change this process now, right? And that's how a lot of us do as technologists, right? Or even as business people. We focus on the systems and our processes. Empathy breaks you out of that, right? And so how do we embed empathy into processes to drive customer obsession? And so I want to use an example to illustrate this. This is a customer we work with, medical device manufacturer, and we worked with them to redesign their process around onboarding new customers for medical device bracelets, right? So you guys are probably familiar with these medical device bracelets. If you fall, if your family member, parent, grandparent falls, it actually goes off and alerts and people come, right? Or emergency help comes, not just people, emergency help comes, sorry. So we work with them to start looking at how do we improve the process experience for onboarding new customers. And part of the challenge here, we're working with the BPM team. The BPM team was just trying to figure out, like, okay, how do we reframe our program to start dealing with some of these customer issues? What new skills do we need, right? And so when we started working with them, we brought in the customer journey view. So we basically said, okay, let's look at the journey that the customer goes through. How many of you use customer journey maps, are familiar? This is another piece of the puzzle here, is I recommend taking a look at, we have a lot of research, there's a lot of research out there in general and books on customer journey mapping. This is a great way to move your BPM initiative from just looking at internal systems to connecting it to the customer. And so with this customer, we basically started with the customer journey map. Let's walk through the journey, the stages that the customer goes through when you're onboarding them, right? And one of the things I love when we do these consulting projects with clients is we also start off with looking at personas. So we actually say, okay, we need to define a persona. A good example client. Sometimes we'll bring in actual data. I actually love it when we make up people. It's actually really fun. And so when we started out, we just said, okay, let's define a customer. And so we named this customer Joan. This is Joan. Meet Joan. Joan is 55 years old. She lives in, we gave all these crazy attributes, right? 55 years old, lives in Cape Cod. She owns a Christmas tree year-round shop. So you can buy Christmas stuff year-round. They made this up, right? I'm just like, okay, well, whatever. Her mom currently lives in Florida, is retired, is getting older. And so Joan learned that her mom actually fell, and she only learned because the neighbor in the community her mom lives in told her, right? And so we're making this story, building this story. And so the key here is we also brought in the different processes that the journey touched. So it's not just about going through the journey. This is that digital operational excellence side, operational excellence, connecting experience to journey. And so when we started out, we wanted to look at what are the different stages of the journey that touch the processes so we can identify opportunities for change and improvement. And so the first step, Joan initiated contact with the device manufacturer. And we also brought in this empathy piece. This is the secret ingredient, right? We always look at metrics around, speed, efficiency. This is a new metric. So we brought in, what is the emotional state of this persona? Worried, right? And she's connecting with the sales process. And so we're trying to figure out, is there something we can change in the sales process to change that metric, right? And so as we talk through this, there's really nothing we can do directly in the sales process to change. We can give some advice, but nothing dramatic, right? when Joan started evaluating options, she's called different companies, trying to figure out, which company I should go with for this medical bracelet. She's overwhelmed, right? And she's still touching the sales process. But again, feedback was, there's not a lot we can change in the sales process to actually impact this. When she orders the service, right, she finally settles on, I'm going to buy this service from this vendor. What do you think her emotional state was? What do you think the emotional metric was at that point? How do you think she felt after she said, okay, I'm ready to order the service? Relieved, right? Again, we probably don't want to change that. There's things we can do. But from a customer emotion metric or empathy metric, we probably don't want to change it. Now we bring in Joan's mom. Meet Mildred, right? We actually gave these names. It's kind of crazy. But Mildred, she's looking at this and she's saying, okay, I'm here, I'm by myself, I probably need this service. But what do you think her emotional state is when the service installation guy comes out? What do you think her emotional state is? What's that? Upset. Worried, upset, very anxious, right? She's looking at it saying, I'm one step away from potentially going into a nursing home, right? So she's very anxious trying to figure out, like, okay, is this something I want? Is this something I don't want? And what we found is, when the service installer comes out to install the service as part of the delivery process, sometimes Joan or Mildred, the mom, she would refuse getting the service, right? And so ultimately, Mildred, sometimes when the mom refused service, the daughter or the child would not find out until several weeks later that the service was not installed. And so we found, just using that empathy, the emotional piece, we found an opportunity to improve and redesign the process, right? So being able to redesign the process so that the daughter is notified immediately whenever the service installation is refused. And so the tech can talk immediately, if need be, to the daughter and say, okay, this is what's going on, and be able to communicate. Right? And that is a process change. It's also a data change to be able to provide the information needed so that the service tech could actually talk to the daughter. And then we also found one other change based on the emotional metric, the empathy metric, was around billing. And so when we talked about billing, what we found is the daughter was frustrated by the fact that she could not share the bill, split the bill over other siblings, which sounds minor. But if you think about it, from a customer obsession standpoint, every month I got to pay this friggin' bill, then I got to go chase down my brothers and sisters to get them to pay me back. That's not cool, right? It's kind of painful. And so what we started looking at is redesigning the billing process so that they could, so that the daughter or the primary responsible person could actually split the bill up to other people, right? And so another redesign opportunity. And so this is a great example of how to bring in the empathy metric, the emotional metric. And we're seeing customers begin to use journey maps with their BPM teams to say, here's the key stages of the journey. Here's how customers feel, what the emotional aspect are. Are they happy? Are they sad, delighted, mad, angry? And then starting to redesign the processes to improve that emotional metric. This is a new metric, and that's why I say take a look at customer journey maps to drive this. And so in wrapping up, what are the recommended next steps? What should you do next to move towards customer obsession? The first step I strongly recommend is partner with your marketing and sales roles to identify customer process pain points. Right? And one of the things that we found at Forrester, we did a survey that looked at how many CIOs work with CMOs, the Chief Marketing Officer, right? What we found is 50% have completely different technology agendas, right? Going in completely different directions. And so one of the first steps as a process person, if you haven't done so already, is to talk to marketing, understand what are the key metrics, what are the key drivers, the key initiatives you have going on to understand how you can improve underlying process pain points. The second piece is reframing those operational metrics to align with critical customer metrics. We work with a lot of customers now, of our customers, just going through, looking at their operational metrics and understanding those customer metrics and aligning those two things. And what we're finding is CIOs and CEOs appreciate that because they're able to get that combination. If we go back to the example of Jaguar, that's a perfect example of the marketing metric was around increasing brand awareness. But the actual retail store metric was around, we need to just get sales, right? And so they needed to align those two metrics to make it work. And then the last piece is replacing traditional process methods with low-code approaches that emphasize speed. So really looking at your BPM program, identifying where are the opportunities to bring in things like test and learn, to use not just Agile, but use some of the lean startup methods, seeding methods, if you will. And so with that, I want to say thank you.